working okay. So yeah, I'm all set.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's 7 o'clock, so let me get a few introductions out of the way and then we'll get this party started.
Sure thing.
All right. Well, a few quick thank yous before we start. First off, thank you to Riley so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming and visiting and to chat with the Peloton Moms Book Club today. Your books are constantly recommended in the group, so we're really excited to have you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And thanks to Jennifer Crowley, the group's founder, for all of the things that she does behind the scenes to help make these chats possible. And thank you to all of the moms who have read Survive the Night, recommended it to their friends, who were able to make the live tonight, even with the busy mom hectic schedules that we all keep. And then thank you to the moms that are going to catch this on recording. We welcome you and are so glad to have you join us.
Thank you
And with
very, very much.
Yeah, with us tonight is Riley Sager, and a quick introduction for Riley. Riley Sager is the pseudonym of a former journalist, editor, and graphic designer. Now a full-time writer, Riley is the author of 5 thriller novels. His first novel, Final Girls, is a national and international bestseller that's been published in 25 languages and won the ITW Thriller Award for Best Hardcover Novel. And it's also a Kindle deal right now for $1.99, guys. So
It is. Yes, it is. Yes, thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no problem. And Sager's subsequent novels, The Last Time I Lied, Lock Every Door, and Crimson Sky Award winner, Home Before Dark. I believe all of the books were instant New York Times bestsellers. And Riley is a native of Pennsylvania, and he now lives in Princeton, New Jersey. So welcome, Riley.
Thanks for having me. Although I have to admit, and I said this when my publicist first gave me, the invitation. I'm like, is that disqualifying?
No, it's not. You're welcome to join, even if you don't have a Peloton or. So tonight we're going to be chatting about Survive the Night, Riley's novel that debuted in, I think, at the end of June this past summer.
Yes, June 29th, maybe. I forget now. Yeah, it's been a long couple months.
I believe it. So why don't you tell us, for the moms who haven't had a chance to read the book, why don't you go ahead and give us a little spoiler-free synopsis? It's always difficult doing these thriller chats because we try not to spoil anything. So
yes, so Survive the Night is about a college student named Charlie, and she's had a hard time of things lately. Her roommate and best friend was murdered by a man known as the campus killer, and Charlie is just overcome with with grief and guilt, and because their last interaction wasn't a good one. And so she's just feeling all these feelings, and she just needs to get away from school and go home. And it's set in 1991. And in the early 90s, and when I was in college, how you did that is you went to the campus ride board, and people put up flyers saying, I need a ride from here to here, and they put a little tab with their phone number, and you would call and meet up and get a ride. And so she needs a ride to Ohio, and she meets a man at the ride board named Josh. He's a fellow student who says, I'm going in the same direction. Let's share a ride. And basically no sooner do they start off than she starts to suspect that Josh might not be all he says he is, and that he in fact might be the campus killer. And so it's a girl in a car with a suspected killer speeding down in a dark highway in the middle of the night, and how is she going to survive the night? It's literally that's the question of the book.
definitely. And when I first started reading this, I was, to put it in modern day times, I'm like, this is the ride share from hell. So
exactly, yes.
I loved the book. I have all of your books, but I haven't read Home Before Dark yet, so I'm hoping to get to that one this month. But we did a poll earlier this summer about, to all of our members, who are the authors that you would most love to see come and chat with us, and your name popped up over and over again. So we were very
so cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, moms.
Yeah, so we like to try to get questions from our members, so I'm going to incorporate those into the notes that I've prepared this evening. And so first up, Christine Welch had wanted to know, where did the idea for this particular book originate from?
Yeah, I wish I knew. It's a weird story. Like, ideas, sometimes they're inspired by a movie I'm watching or a news story I see, or sometimes it's something that's been in the back of my head for many years, and I finally get a grasp on how to write it. For this one, it popped into my head unprompted, and I still don't know why. Um, Film noir, Little Red Riding Hood.
No.
And it really is like, that's Charlie. Like, I gave her, she wears a red coat and she's literally trying to get home to grandmother's house. And it just, I didn't know what to do with this sentence that was in my head. And so I started thinking about it, and I just come off writing Home Before Dark, which was such a different book. It's an intergenerational ghost story with a book within a book, and set 25 years apart. And it was so complex that I wanted to just do something completely different and something a lot simpler. And to me, you couldn't get any more simple and straightforward than like two people in a car suspecting each other and playing mind games with each other. And so that just, then it became, okay, how do I make a book out of this? Like, how did I turn this sentence into a book length thing that people will want to read? And it was difficult from the standpoint of, there was a pandemic going on at the time. And so that made things even weirder and more stressful than a normal book writing process.
Right. Well, so it sounds like maybe with this one in particular, you had like this one sentence of a plot and then you developed it from there. So we always like to, when you sit down to write, do you generally think of plot first or characters first, or does it vary from book to book?
It's usually intertwined. Like, it's the first thing is the plot, but then immediately it's like, okay, who is the best person to tell this story through? Like, what is their deal and how does it relate to the plot? And so I knew that Charlie, her character was so integral to this plot, because it's, you are in the passenger seat with her through this entire ride. And so how she sees things and how she deals with things is very important. And Charlie has a kind of quirk of a character where um, she calls them movies in her mind, but they're pretty much hallucinations. She's been through a lot in her life, and when things get so stressful for her, her brain just sort of flips a switch and she perceives things as a movie, because movies can't hurt you. It's just something you're watching, whereas real life is dangerous. And so that's how she copes with things. When you're in a car with a man you think might be a serial killer, that's a really bad time to have these movies in your mind going off. And so there are a lot of portions in the book where Charlie isn't sure if what just happened really happened, and the reader's not certain if what just happened really happened. And so there's a lot of mind games going on with the reader and Charlie and Josh and Charlie with herself. And so that was where like her core character came into, okay, this is how I make a book out of this idea.
Mhm. Well, it was interesting with Charlie. I love a good unreliable narrator, and when you do an unreliable narrator well, I mean, you're always questioning everything that you're reading. Is this true? Is this person lying? What's the real deal? And it was interesting with Charlie, to have these movies in her head, dreamscapes. It was a different take on an unreliable narrator, and you chose to reveal that at the beginning of the story versus the end. So can you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really the challenge I find in writing these books is one, putting the twist in there. And now I kind of have a reputation for some shocking twists. And so now readers know that a twist is coming. So now it's like, okay, how do I still surprise people who know something is coming? So there's a lot of playing with expectations and what I think the reader will be thinking at certain points as they're reading the book. And then at the same time, I don't like to cheat the reader. Like I don't, like there was a book I read, and I won't say the title, but a lot of people read it, where um it is like an unreliable narrator situation, and the narrator could just flat out say what's happening and doesn't and refuses, just because there'd be no suspense that way. And so that I'm like, okay, you could have literally told us on page 10 and we all could have gone home. And so I don't like to do that. I want to play fair with the reader. So I like the unreliable narrator, but I also want them to be logical in their unreliability, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, it made sense. Emily Wyland in our group wanted to know if that particular version of the unreliable narrator with Charlie, did that stem from something else you've read or seen before and perhaps a movie, or was that she was just wondering if there was something else she should check out because she really appreciated that and enjoyed it?
Oh, that's thanks. No, it really was part of the process of like, how do I keep her in this car?
Mhm.
And because I know, because I'm myself would think this way, it's like, just girl, get out of the car, get out of the car any way possible. And so I had to come up with reasons why she's still in that car, even when long past when she shouldn't be. And one of them was to set it in 1991, which was before Uber and cell phones and GPS. So you're really at the mercy of a payphone and blindly trusting the person who's driving. So that was key right there. But that's where the movies in her mind came in, because I thought, okay, if she doesn't trust herself, then who can she trust?
Mhm.
And when you don't know who to trust, including your own mind, what do you do in that situation? And so that became a big part of sustaining the plot and the tension.
Yeah, and I mean, writing thrillers and suspense novels, I think one of the biggest parts in doing that well is to keep the suspense, start at a level and then just slowly turn up the heat, ratchet it up. And it was interesting how you did that in a car with this forced proximity. And I mean, the bulk of the book takes place in the car. So at first I was like, okay, are we gonna go from point A to point B? And you really took us on a ride there. That 20 questions game, oh my gosh, I was just like flipping through the pages. I was like, oh my gosh, who's going to say it? Who's going to confirm it? And so just, with the setting that you chose, just talk to us a little bit about how you managed to keep the suspense going throughout the book.
Yeah, when I first got the idea, and even when I started writing it, because normally I was a big outliner.
Mhm.
And then with Survive the Night, I decided to not. I'm like, I'm not going to I wanted it to be fast and spontaneous. And I thought that I was afraid that if I was outlining it, that would go away. I mean, I knew the final destination. I knew where we were going to end up, but I didn't know how we were going to get there. And so it became just thinking of ways to just, okay, it's literally two people in a car for a big chunk of this book. How do I keep that tension? And so it did become things like, okay, let's think about what happens when you're on a drive. You know, people pass the time by playing card games like 20 questions. And that's when I'm like, oh yeah, that could be very interesting. And it turned out to be, I think most people say it's probably the most suspenseful scene of the book, where it's just the tension is so thick in that scene, because he knows that she knows and is trying to get her to admit she knows, and she doesn't want, and it was so much fun to write and so much fun to come up with the questions and her answers.
Right.
But it was just things like that, like, let's go to a rest stop and have her try to get a ride with someone else, another person, thinking that she's crazy. And so like, it just was thinking of, okay, I'm on a long drive, what happens on a long drive, and now let's amp it up to a crazy suspenseful level.
Yeah, definitely. And you did that well with the rest stop was also another tension filled one for me personally when I read it. So we're always curious about the writing process. And I know you said for this one in particular, you didn't really outline it. Well, when you sit down to write, do you write linearly, or do you think about a scene and you write that scene, or does it kind of vary on how your mood for the day?
It starts off really with me when I'm just beginning and still figuring out the book. I will just write some scenes like that, just, and sometimes I don't even use them. I'm just, just trying to sort of get the wheels turning again. And because when I finish a book, and I like to take a break and just read for pleasure, which is a rare thing for me nowadays. And so when I come back from that break, you kind of sit down in front of your computer and go, I've forgotten how to write. And so you need to get exercising again. And so I just come up with scenes and think, oh, this might be a good scene at some point, and then I'll write like a page or two of it. And then I had this whole big file with just like snippets of things that sometimes I'll insert them into the book when the time comes, and sometimes they just never leave that file. But for the most part, when I'm actually focused writing, it is linearly. It's just from start to finish. I really don't do the skipping around thing.
Mhm.
But I know other authors who do that. There's like, if I'm blocked, I'll just like skip ahead 2 chapters and then start writing that one. So to
Right.
each their own, whatever works.
Yeah, definitely. I don't write. I assume that linearly would just make it easier, but whatever's easier for you. I mean, whatever works, definitely. So I know that you had said you knew the ending. You always knew the ending for Survive the Night. Is that usually your process with your other books? Do you always know the ending, or does that vary for you?
I always know the ending, except for my second one, The Last Time I Lied, where I was about halfway through the writing of it, and I still didn't know. And I was getting very, very stressed about it, where I was losing sleep because I was just like, I'd lie awake and be like 2 a.m. I'd just be like, I really need to think of an ending. Because it was getting time where you have to sow the seeds of things leading up to that ending. And when you don't know the ending, what are you going to write? So that one, it was a very stressful time. And then literally at 2 a.m, it just popped into my head. I'm like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And then from there on, I was like, yes. So because of that stressful situation, I always now know how it's going to end.
Right. I just recently chatted with Megan Miranda for Such a Quiet Place, and she didn't know where she was going to end up with that book. And I was like, oh my gosh, that must have been so stressful. Like, you paint yourself into this corner and then you have to get yourself out. So
Yeah,
kudos
she
to
and I
you.
have done many events together, and she's awesome. And I love chatting with her.
Yeah, she's so lovely. We appreciated her time too. Was the title for this book always Survive the Night?
Oh gosh, no. This one was my I have a weird history with titles. My editor and my publisher never liked my original titles, like ever. And so like Final Girls was the only one where like, because that was on submission. So like it came across their desk saying Final Girls, and they thought, okay, good. But all my other titles have changed. And so Survive the Night, they didn't like my original title. So I had to come up with like many alternates. And it got to the point where my editor and I were just emailing, we were stringing words together. It was almost like Mad Libs. We're just like this and this, or this and this, and just emailing back and forth. And Survive the Night was one of them. And finally, after way too much back and forth, the actual publisher was like, just pick Survive the Night. So I thank the
Wow.
publisher of Dutton Books for just deciding for us. Yeah.
Did you have to do any sort of research for this book, or because I know that you went to school for film studies, is that correct? You majored in film
Yes,
studies, so
I
I
did.
imagine you didn't have to do a terrible amount of research, but is it common that you do research for your books, or specifically or generally as you want to be?
I do as much research as required. Like I don't go overboard.
Mhm.
Um, I find that if you do too much research, you want to use it all because you did all that work. And then you're just trying to cram in like information that really doesn't matter. And so I kind of do it as I go along. If I come across them like, I don't know how this works or what this does. So I'm going to have to pause the writing and look into it. For Survive the Night, I had to do zero research. And this was part of the pandemic thing where like I couldn't go anywhere and I really didn't have the mental bandwidth to really do a lot of research. And so that's another reason why it's set in 1991. I was a senior in high school then. And so I remember the fall of 1991 better than I do 2 months ago. And so I remember like the movies that were in the theaters then and the songs that were playing on the radio and things like that. And the movies that Charlie references, because Charlie is also a film studies major. So all the movie references I already knew. She and Josh play a game of like, they'll name a line from the movie and you have to guess the movie. And so that was all up here. And even the road they take. Like I live in New Jersey now, but I'm from central Pennsylvania. And so they take Interstate 80 from New Jersey across the Delaware Water Gap into the Poconos. And I've driven that stretch of road thousands of times probably. And so I knew exactly what, okay, at this point, there's the toll booth, there's the bridge, then there's like the river on one side and the cliffs on the other side. And then we get into the Poconos and so there's literally no research needed. I
Wow.
was very lazy with the research, admittedly.
Well, I mean, kind of what you said, like the more research that you do, the more obligated you feel to throw it in. So, I mean, I get that. I can appreciate that. And lucky for you that this one didn't require much. And you were able to write it during the pandemic nonetheless. So,
Yeah, and if I didn't have like if I knew nothing about movies but made a character like a film studies major, I would have been brushing up on my movies. So yeah, this just happened to be all of my interest and knowledge crammed into one book, basically.
well, that's awesome. So when you're writing, when we've talked to other authors, there's usually two kinds of processes in writing. It's like they throw a lot down onto the page, and then when they get into the editing process, they start to whittle away, and then the other is they start to add to in the editing process. So when you're writing, when you turn in your first draft, how true do you think that is to the final copy that we get to read?
It depends on the book, really. With Survive the Night, most things were already on the page. My editor, there were a couple scenes later in the book that are spoilery that my editor or my agent suggested to maybe like up the tension and up the stakes a little bit more. But for the most part, it was just really kind of digging into character and just the dialogue because it's so dialogue dependent, especially in the first half when it's two people talking in a car and everything they say to each other has so many meanings and is such importance. And so my editor and I really thought of that as like a two character play where it's just like this could be performed on a stage, kind of just two people talking to each other, and how do you still maintain the tension and the psychological interest. Other times, back to the last time I lied, my editor read the first draft and was like, it's nice. And I was like, oh boy. Because normally she's like, oh my God, I loved it. So when I got an, it's nice, I was like, oof. And so that required a ton of rewriting. There was some very, very intensive book surgery going on there, like right until I always have to hand in the book, like my last moment, I need to finish that book and give them an edited, finished version is right before Christmas. I handed the final version of that in on December 23rd.
Ooh,
Yes. So, and I was working right up until like that. It was like midnight on December 23rd. I'm like, here it is, finally. But and then other times I'm the one who wants to do more. With Lock Every Door, my editor's like, it's great. I'm like, is it? She's like, it is. I'm like, is it really though? I kind of want it. So I asked for 2 more weeks to do like my own, like, she had no issues with it. And I'm like, trust me, this will make the book better. Just trust me. And she did, and she's like, okay, 2 weeks. And then I handed it in, and she's like, yeah, you're right. It's better. I'm like, yes. So it varies from every book.
Well, like
But
you
I
said,
always want the it's great version.
yeah. Well, it sounded like that.
Yeah.
The comment that you got back on the other book, it kind of sounded like the kiss of death. It's fine. It's
That's
okay.
nice. There's
Yeah.
a lot to love. I'm like, oh God.
So let's circle back to Charlie, the female protagonist in Survive the Night. The way you wrote this story, like you said, heavy on the dialogue, and it really did read like a screenplay, and hopefully that would make it easy to adapt in the future. You never know. But
You never know. Yeah, that's hopefully it's odd. Like my most movie-centric book is the only one that has not been optioned yet.
wow.
And I'm like, get on that, Hollywood.
Yeah, definitely. So, you tend to focus on female protagonists in your books, and as we've talked about Charlie, she had a lot going on with the death of her parents and then the murder of her roommate. She starts out in one place of this book. She goes through a metamorphosis essentially. There were a few times that I wanted to wring her neck. I was like, "Girl, what are you doing?" But
Yes, you
it read
really
like a
do
movie.
sometimes. Yeah.
So when I wrote up my review, I was like, just remember that this is set in 1991. She could not call for help. Like, just temper expectations when you read this book. Like, just remember the setting and where you're at. So let's just talk about Charlie, the decisions that she made, and the process that she went through in the book.
Yeah, I get asked about like writing the female protagonist a lot, and I get asked why. And the main reason is that I think that women are so easily and unwisely underestimated. And I love having a character who's underestimated, even if it's themselves who's doing the underestimating through the course of these crazy events that happen in my books, discover that they're capable of so much more than they thought they were. And I think everyone can relate to that, male or female. And that's the kind of character that interests me. Like people love to read, like someone like Jack Reacher. I do too. I'm not interested in writing him because he's so self-assured. Like, when Reacher walks into like a bar, it's he's gonna walk out unscathed. And so like that to me isn't interesting to create. So I like the people who are like, I'm not that strong. And then like they're forced to be strong. They're like are literally fighting for survival in most cases. And Charlie starts off very much like that. She's a very, I kind of thought of her as like this wounded puppy. And with good reason, like life has been hard on her. And by the end of the book, she's kind of a pit bull. And so like that was a good journey to chart. And that was fun to write and interesting to write. And but when you start out with someone who is like sort of like an abused puppy, you know that they're going to behave in ways that you would not behave. And so part of it was like just trying to get people to understand like, okay, no, this is not a good decision she's making right now. But we need to understand, based on her knowledge and her past and the movies in her mind, it's the best choice that she thinks she can make at this particular moment in time. And so that was very challenging to do because I was even struggling with, I know like readers have, and I've at the same time as a creator being like, Charlie, you do not want to get back in that car. Just do not, please. But she felt like she had to, or reasons. And so that was a challenge to kind of do it in a way where you know that, okay, I do not agree with this, but I understand why.
Mhm. Well, it kind of played out to me when I think back to like 80s horror films and early 90s horror films. It to me, it played out like the female protagonists in those movies who start out in one place, who make wrong decisions. You know, Jamie Lee Curtis coming through and ultimately prevailing in the movie. So I don't know, it felt appropriate for this book, and given your background and Charlie being the film major and having those hallucinations in her mind. So I think it all worked, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your process.
And
Now,
there are reasons, like you mentioned, like once you reach the very, very end of the book, like it becomes clearer, like, and not to spoil, but there are reasons for why she's making some of these really bad decisions that I can't give away. But yeah, it's
well, now that we've gotten the rundown on Charlie, let's talk about the driver, aka Josh. When you sat down to write Josh, what were your thoughts? How did he develop onto the page?
I was thinking Ted Bundy, like basically, because this is interesting. I went to Penn State, and I think it was 98, maybe, or I could be completely wrong on the year, but Penn State has a massive library with all of these stacks that are very like secluded and isolated and narrow, and a student was murdered in them. Like I think it was 68, but like yeah, she walked into the stacks to look for a book, and a little bit later someone found her, she had been stabbed to death inside the library, and they never caught who did it. But Ted Bundy's like whereabouts, like around before and after that they know of, could have taken him directly through State College, Pennsylvania, and Penn State. And so that is a theory that it could have been Ted Bundy. And he was known for being like this strapping, handsome guy, and that's why, you know, women kind of trusted him. And so when I pictured Josh, I pictured this guy who is just like, you know, I think Charlie describes him as like the hero of a 40s comedy or the villain of an 80s comedy. And I wanted like this, you know, this handsome football player kind of guy who you just instinctively trust because they're so all American.
Mhm.
And I wanted him to be kind of likable. Like there is like a lot to like he's a chatty, like engaging guy. And it was fun writing the dialogue with him to make it like skirt that line between like it could be friendly or it could be menacing, and you could it could be both. And so that was my read on Josh, is that he just, yeah, a really charming, handsome Ted Bundy who might have been capable of horrible, horrible things.
Emily said Ted Bundy is exactly who she was picturing. So, and you're right. I mean, the dialogue from Josh, you did it so well. I was constantly, okay, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I was not sure up until you wanted to let us know one way or the other. So I think you did a great job with that.
Thank you. Yeah, it
Uh,
was so much fun. And this is, I like it when readers enjoy it and when I enjoy doing it, because sometimes writing, like it's just like, oh, this was hard to write and I just want it out of my sight. And readers would be like, I loved it. And so there's like this weird, I know how the sausage is made and sometimes it's not pretty, but readers don't. And so they see it for the finished product. So it was nice when it converged, where I was like, yes, I enjoyed writing him and people like reading him.
mhm. Yeah, we had some more comments coming in saying I changed my mind about him so many times. Me too. I wasn't sure right up until the end. So you won us over with Josh and the writing. But I am a self-professed pop culture junkie. And I was definitely here for all of the music and movie references and Survive the Night. And for those that aren't aware, there is a Spotify playlist for Survive the Night that I actually was listening to while I was jotting down my notes, and I'm going to link it here shortly for everyone. How did you decide what songs to reference? And was there a meaning to the story behind each song, or was it just a general vibe you were trying to portray?
It was mostly a general vibe. The only song that I knew I had to use was "Come as You Are" by Nirvana, because in that beginning stage where I was just thinking about the book, one of the scenes that came to me was man, woman driving down a deserted highway, and that excellent opening riff of "Come as You Are" starts to play. And it just felt so evocative and perfect to me that I'm like, I must include this scene in the book. And then there were others that kind of had some meaning. I mentioned like Susie and the Banshees, "Kiss Them for Me,"
Mhm.
which is just such a cool song and just so evocative of that era. It was all over the radio in November of 1991. But also, like, there's a hidden meaning because it's about Jane Mansfield and how she died in a car accident. And Charlie's parents died in a car accident, and cars and roads play such a big part of the book that was another one where I'm like, I have to squeeze that in somehow. And then the others were just trying to set a really nice mood. It brought me back to my very emo wasn't a thing in 1991. So I don't know what I was in high school. I wasn't a goth, but like this was the music I listened to. It was like The Cure and Depeche Mode and REM.
I was sad. One of my favorite albums, which does not fit the vibe, so I totally understand why it wasn't included. But one of my favorite albums is "Octoon Baby" by U2. So I was like crossing my fingers for that.
That one was just after the events of this book.
Well, then that makes
Same
sense.
thing with Beauty and the Beast. Like I wanted to name drop Beauty and the Beast because I love Disney, I love their movies, but Beauty and the Beast actually came out the week after the events of the book, and so I couldn't mention that one either, and I was really bummed.
Well, in addition to the music that you feature, there were also a lot of movie references. So kind of the same question, were those intentional or was it more of a vibe or?
The movie references, I knew that Charlie was going to be a film studies major, and I knew that she was going to use because she relates to movies more than she does real life, even without the movies in her mind. And I knew that she was going to be in a situation and she'd start to think, okay, how do people in the movies get out of these situations? And which is not probably the best barometer of like how you're supposed to act, but she did look to film to be like, how do I behave in this situation and how do I get out of it? And so that's where a lot of the movies mentioned fell in. And then also, movies are this kind of great uniter. Like everyone loves the movies and everyone knows the movies. And it was another way of getting people to relate to her character. If she drops a reference to, you know, Rear Window, and people who've seen Rear Window are like, I get that reference. Yeah, and so that's like a little bonding experience I have with Charlie. And so it was trying to bring in some movies that everyone has heard of and some that maybe people haven't seen or heard of, but to not get too obscure that people don't know what the heck she's talking about. Like it didn't want to name like, oh, this 1971 Czech film, no one would get that reference.
I think I got most of the references. When they were doing the quotes, my husband is better at quotes than I am. So some of those was like, wait, what is that from? But then when you said what it's from, I was like, okay, yes, I'll recall that. But yeah, okay. So one of our favorite fun questions to ask authors is, when you're writing the novel, do you envision like, man, if this ever got made, this is who I think would play Charlie, or this is who I would think would play Josh? Did you have any dream casting either while you were writing or maybe that you pondered after you were writing, or does that just not factor into?
It does, because sometimes it's helpful to sketch a character if you have a celebrity in mind. Yet I really don't do it that often. Like there are only a handful of instances, and usually they're secondary characters, where I know it's like, okay, they need to make a quick impression. So I'm going to model this character after Jamie Lee Curtis. Like she could play her in the film version if she wanted to. But for the most part, I really don't. And I don't like to say like who I think should play, because like, and this is, I still can't wrap my head around this, but like, you know, I do have like some of these books are in development as a movie or a TV show. And that doesn't mean it'll actually happen or get made, but I do know that like there are actors and actresses who are reading the books and knowing, like, I was told like some of the actresses who received like Survive the Night, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I hope they like it. And none of them have like, there's nothing officially going on with it, so I guess they didn't.
Well,
Who
the book's
knows?
still young, but yeah. So
Yeah.
you have other books that are in development, and we know that in development means a lot of different things in Hollywood. Are there any far enough along in the process that you're getting a little bit more excited, or it's all of them are really early in the process?
All of them are really early in the process, and sometimes with some of them it's like the second or third time like they've been optioned or in a new development process. And then, you know, the pandemic just kind of put the brakes on everything in Hollywood for a year. And so, you know, I don't even like, I'll use this, and I stay out of like, I don't have any say in the development process at all. Like I love movies too much to really want to get involved in how they're made. So I just be like, oh, you want to option this? Here you go. Good luck. If you have any questions, I'm here. And then that's all, until like if there's news, they'll tell me. But like, you know, for example, Home Before Dark was optioned literally like 2 weeks. The deal was finalized 2 weeks before the pandemic really hit and everything shut down.
Hmm.
I have not heard a single thing about it since. So I don't know. Like I just always hope for the best, but I also know that Hollywood is a very weird place,
Yeah,
and
totally
that
fair.
there's a chance that nothing will ever get made. And I'm cool with that. I've made peace with it. Like for me,
Right.
a book is enough, you know?
Well, exactly. I was going to say, I would hope that you would just write the book, and your initial thoughts were the book is enough. And if it gets picked up later, that's just the icing on the cake. And that would be so super cool, you know?
Exactly. Yes.
Um, so we just had one question come in. Would love to know Riley's favorite creepy read or creepy writing author.
Oh gosh. In terms of creepy, my favorite creepy reads, I'll give you like the only two books have given me nightmares in my entire life. One was Red Dragon by Thomas Harris,
Mhm.
and the other was Bird Box by Josh Mallerman. As far as other creepy authors, I Stephen King is always, he's king, no pun intended. CJ Tudor is a fantastic British author who her books like get a little bit supernatural in there, and it's psychological suspense and supernatural. Um, I just there are so many that I adore, like like Megan Miranda and Megan Abbott, and just yeah, so many.
And what would you say your favorite thing about writing in this genre is?
Oh gosh, I really it's a hard process writing a book, and what makes it worthwhile is when I get to do things like this and people ask me questions, and people will say like, you did a great job with Josh, or I thought this was so suspenseful, because it is a lot of work and trial and error, and it's different when like you can read a review and it's like, oh, well, that's nice of them to say, but when it's like more one-on-one, it's even better. And like it's really fun to tell stories. And so when you know from someone that like your book kept them enthralled or entertained or on edge for however long it took to read, it's a really great feeling.
Well, this one I devoured pretty much in real time of the book. And that's another thing that I liked about this book was that, you know, you were in the car in the setting for X amount of hours. And that's kind of like minute by minute, page by page, you were keeping the pace. So,
To the point where I even like had to kind of time it out where I was like, okay, the like I cheat a little bit toward the end. And I think if people, know that, but like at least like the first 2/3 of the book are kind of just like, it is real time. It is happening as much as like it takes you to read the book. And that was something, a goal that I set for myself, not realizing that, oh, that's hard. That's really difficult to do.
we had another question come in, and I know that you had just released the title a little bit earlier than you might have anticipated. Your next book, The House Across the Lake. Is there anything that you can share? Any details?
I can share. Yes, first that the title. Yeah, we did not want to reveal it so early, but like someone at the publisher just put it up, like, and so it was like on all my bios. Like I'm like, when did this happen, and who did this, and how do we fix it? And so we're just like, we'll just reveal it. Hey, it's The House Across the Lake, everyone. And I mean, I can say that like it's very it's difficult to talk about because it sounds suspiciously like The Woman in the Window, yet it's nothing like The Woman in the Window. And so we're still trying to figure out like the way to like finesse the copy to make people know, like, we know it sounds like The Woman in the Window, but trust us, it is not at all The Woman in the Window. But it is in terms of like there's Rear Window vibes. It's a woman at a lake house, and she strikes up a friendship with the glamorous couple who live in the house across the lake. And so she starts spying on them and starts to realize that their perfect marriage isn't as perfect as it might seem. And then the wife disappears, and she becomes obsessed with figuring out what happened. And it gets crazy.
Well, I love crazy, so I'm excited.
So this is I without a doubt, like, I hope it's my most shocking book. So
wow.
that's that's
saying something. Well, so we
I saw the release date it's so far off, you guys. It's June 28th of 2022. So
so we like to end our chats with asking the authors, what are you currently reading and recommending? And then I'll add one more question to that because it just came in. What is your personal favorite of your own books?
Well, I'll answer that one first. I can't pick because it's like, choosing your kids. But I mean, I will say that the one I'm probably most proud of, and I'm proud of all of them in different ways, but I mean, Final Girls completely changed my existence. Like, without that book, I would not be here talking to you. I would not be in this house. Like, it literally changed. I went from, like, unemployed former journalist to New York Times bestseller, like, in the course of like 2 years. And so yeah, with that's because Final Girls happened, and because it got the attention of so many people like Stephen King and Whoopi Goldberg and Entertainment Weekly, and people spread the word far and wide. And yeah, and now I'm living a completely different life than I was when I wrote it. What book am I reading now? I just finished one. I get a lot of books to read in advance. And I just finished one called The Paradox Hotel by Rob Hart. And that comes out in January or February, I think. And it's trippy. Like, it's about like time travel is a thing, and there's a hotel where people stay before they go off time traveling. But there becomes like some strange ripples in the time-space continuum. And so it reads like a film noir, like hard-boiled mystery from the 40s crossed with like science fiction from the future. And the main character is just so wonderfully idiosyncratic and messed up and funny. And it's a really fascinating book. And the one I'm about to start, like literally after this, I'm going to start this book. I don't read romance per se, like I really don't, but I really am looking forward to reading this. Like I've heard so much about it. Like Rachel Hawkins is amazing, and so I know that this is her pen name. And I saw her describe it on Twitter as like hocus pocus, but they have sex. And I heard that, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna read it. Why not? It's Halloween. I want something light. I just, I write about murder and mayhem so much. Like just, yeah. So we'll see how it goes. I'm excited.
Fantastic. We have a lot of members who picked that as their book of the month choice, and hopefully you'll love it because we have really enjoyed it over in the group. So.
Yeah, I like to read. Mostly I stick to thrillers because I like to see what others are doing, and I like to keep up with like what's going on in that genre. And I do like to read some literary fiction. Like I have Cloud Cuckoo Land sitting on my table that I just bought. But sometimes I'm just going to read something that I would not normally read at all. And the last one I did was, I'm going to get the title wrong. Is it Evie Jones Starts Over?
Starts Over.
Did I get her name right? Evie Jones?
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, that was like, I like the cover and it sounds nice. And I was in the mood for nice. And it hit the spot. It really did.
Somebody just asked, have you read Project Hail Mary?
I haven't yet. Evie Drake, thank you. Yes, Evie, yeah. I haven't. I'm not normally a science fiction guy, and that's why, like, Rob Hart is a friend of mine, and I knew he'd been working on it, and I knew it was like about like a time travel hotel, and I was like, yeah, like,
give it a go.
and he like the publisher posted a picture of it, and I was like, I'll take a copy. And it's really cool to be in the position that, and you type in the comment section on Instagram, I'll take a copy, and they'll send you a copy. So like, it's a really nice job perk. I will admit that. Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, well, thank you so much for chatting with us, Riley. We're going to get your current reads and recommendations up on our Instagram and our Facebook, and we might throw in your creepy reads also because it is October and Halloween is right around the corner.
Spooky season is perfect. Yes.
So if anybody's looking to connect with you on social media, where can they find you at?
It's RileySagerBooks.com, and at the top are links to my Twitter, my Instagram, and my Facebook, because they're all different because people have like, so it's like, I think my Twitter is like Riley.Sager, and I think that's the underscore. It's the Instagram is like the .sig. So it's just like, I just direct people to the website and they're right there at the top. And so they can just click on them there.
Well, fantastic. We will direct people there, and we really can't wait for the next book next June. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to promote Survive the Night and recommend it in our group. And everybody, if you haven't read Final Girls yet, remember it's a Kindle deal, so go snag it.
It is, yes. Thank you. Again, I'm terrible with that. My publisher always reminds me, and I just go, shoo.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Riley. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the XX.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.